My name is Kingston. I am a resident elder here at City on a Hill, and my wife and I are placing ourselves in Ferguson in a place where we are praying that the Spirit plants a missional community church in Ferguson. So that's not who I am, but that's my name, and still figuring out who I am. But I have a message this morning for you guys. So a lot of you guys know that I have pretty strict dietary restrictions. You know, no gluten, no dairy. Basically, if you ever eat something, you're like, wow, this tastes so good, I probably can't have it. That also includes sugar. I cannot have a lot of sugar. So, which really sucks because I love sweets. I have a tremendous sweet tooth. So I rely very heavily on frozen blueberries. I love my frozen blueberries. But I have found a really nice accompaniment to those frozen blueberries. And if you have a Costco membership, you want to check this out. There's a what's it called, baby? What's the brand name? Luke. I don't know. She's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Right. The brownies. I don't know. It's sweetened with something called monk fruit in it, okay? And it's just, so monk fruit is God's gift to me. I don't know about to anyone else, but it's God's gift to me because it does not raise your glycemic levels. But it's sweetener. It's natural. It's very good. It comes from a fruit that they call the monk fruit. So this brownie mix comes in a bag, and you get this box, and there's 3 bags in it, and it's super easy to make, right? Like literally three things that go in a bowl, and I stir it up. 3 things. I'm not a cook. I don't know how to bake, but I make some bomb brownies with this mix because I just pour it in, I crack 2 or 3 eggs in there, and then I put 2/3 cup of either avocado oil or coconut oil, and I mix it up real good, and then I pour it into the pan, and I put it in there, and the instructions say to cook it for like 10-15 minutes. That's never long enough. But I just check it. I know the toothpick trick. I do. Do I get credit for that? I feel like that. I know that. I didn't remember exactly what it was the first time I made it. I was like, there's something to do with the toothpick. If I stick it in here, it's supposed to tell me something. And I figured out, like, oh, it's still cakey, so it's not good enough. So when there's nothing on it, anyway, I'm bragging now. Sorry. But I make these brownies, 3 simple ingredients, and it's absolutely just so delicious, so good. And you can go to Costco and you can get the same bag, and you can go to your home and you can make the same brownies. I'm telling you about it. Now, here's the thing. Those brownies are delicious. But a lot of times, we look at what we do in the church kind of in the same way as I just described those brownies, right? Like, it's like a recipe. Like, if you just do these 3 simple steps, you'll have a nice, successful church. If you do these 3 simple steps, you'll have a nice, successful family. If you do these 3 simple steps, you'll have a... So we're in Thessalonians. We're talking about Paul. We're talking about how he's planting this church. 2 weeks ago, I had the privilege of sharing with you guys a little bit of the history with Thessalonians. We started in Acts 17, for those of you who are here for that, where we talked about how Paul went to Thessalonica and how he successfully planted this church and how everybody was so on fire, so much on fire that it got the Jews' attention, and the Jews were like, we don't like this, and they started to squelch it by getting Romans involved and the rabble, whatever the rabble is. They got all this involved to try to squelch and actually begin heavily persecuting Christians in Thessalonica. So much so that Paul had to flee, and he left the church that he just planted, that's a baby infant church, in turmoil. You guys remember talking about that? So he left this church in turmoil, like all this chaos, all that's going on. Don't know what's going to happen to the church, but he has to leave for his life. So he leaves and he flees Thessalonica and starts continuing to plant more churches. Comes to find out that Thessalonica, the church there, is thriving after he left, doing tremendously well. And so he writes a letter to them, encouraging them and sharing things with them and answering some questions that they have. And that's the letter that we're walking through right now, 1 Thessalonians. We just got involved in it. So 1 Thessalonians, we're right here. Paul's talking about, he's writing to this church that he planted. And here's the thing, if Christianity Today or if, Crossway Publishing Company was around then, they would be doing everything that they could to get Paul to sit down and write a book and say, okay, Paul, we need you to tell us how you did this, right? so you came into this hostile territory and everybody was wanting to like end everything and even get to the point where like they wanted to take your life, and it was really scary, and like you did something here, because whenever you left, like they continued in the faith and like they grew, and now they're like this mega church and it's so cool. Can you tell us can you write a book? Can you write a book and tell us what you did? Can you tell us the steps and everything that you got going on? Now here's the thing, is that what we're going to talk about this morning is I think there's these two things that Paul talks about, and I'm not saying that these are the exhaustive things that a church needs to do. I'm not saying it's an exhaustive list, but in 1 Thessalonians 6 through 8, which we're going to read here in just a second, we see two things that Paul says that the church has done that we could do. And by the church, I don't just mean the church in Thessalonica. I'm including Paul in that Christians could do that would be a good thing for us to do, right? So we're looking at 1 Thessalonians 6 through 8. We're going to read what Paul has to say there. Here's the thing. This is a mindset that I want you guys to kind of have this morning, okay? We were in our staff meeting was earlier this week, and Tim, I hope he's not in here. That might go to his head. Tim said something that I thought was really kind of good and profound for all of us to kind of adopt, okay? I think this is good for all of us to kind of embrace. Because of COVID, because of what's happened there, and it just kind of turned churches upside down, and you know, what do we do? Like, everything that we do seems to be so centric and so gather-based, and you know, how are we going to deal with this? Because we can't everything kind of turned on its head, that really right now, with things kind of slowly opening back up, it would benefit all of us, not just City on a Hill, but every Christian, every church, if we started to think like, okay, we're a new church plant, right? Like this is kind of a fresh beginning, a fresh start. Even if you like the first start, it's still a fresh start. If you didn't like the first start, it's still a fresh start. So I just kind of want us all to kind of adopt this idea, okay, we're a church plant, and we want to get some ideas here from Paul in 1 Thessalonians about, okay, so what can we do as a refreshed or fresh, so like you guys are a refreshed church plant. Crystal and I, we could say that we're a fresh church plant up in Ferguson. So what can we do? How can we learn? What is it that Paul's telling us? How can we take this, and what can we do to advance the kingdom in our context, right? So let's look. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, starting in verse 6. It says, "And you became imitators of us and of the Lord, for you received the word in much affliction with the joy of the Holy Spirit, so that you became an example to all the believers in Macedonia. For not only has the word of the Lord sounded forth from you in Macedonia and Achaia, but your faith in God has gone forth everywhere, so that we need not say anything." That's where we're at this morning. That's it. That's the only text we're going to look at. Man. So what are the two things that I saw there? I don't know what you saw. This is what I saw in prayer and looking at this. Here's a question that I want to ask. I have two questions. Could we say what Paul said whenever he said, hey, I came to you, and it was for your benefit that I came to you, and you became imitators of me? Like, could we say that in our neighborhoods? Like, like right now, I'm doing it, and I'll just be honest with you. I'll tell you mine up front so that you don't feel bad. My answer is no, right? My answer is no. My neighbors probably could not say this about me. I probably could not write a letter to my neighborhood and say these words, hey, I know it benefited you greatly that I was among you. Probably couldn't say that. I probably couldn't say, and you became imitators of me and imitators of Christ through me. I probably couldn't say that. Could you guys, in your context, you don't have to answer that, but just think, like, could we say what Paul said here? Because Paul came into this hostile territory, and it wasn't hostile. Let's just get this straight. Paul didn't come into a hostile territory. I need to be careful with my words. He came into a pretty peaceful territory. Everything was fine. Everybody was happy, and he started stirring things up. So he was he was the focal point of the problem in the eyes of many people. So he comes in, he starts stirring things up, and in the midst of what's stirred up, the persecution that comes from that, again, later on in Thessalonians, he writes about people that have died and trying to comfort Thessalonians, and the the general understanding is that the people died because they were killed because of persecution. So this is this is a huge deal going on. So he's here writing to that context, and we're in our nice homes and our nice neighborhoods. Could we say the same thing? Hey, I was among you. It benefited you that I was among you, and you became imitators of me and therefore imitators of Christ. Could we say that? Probably not, right? But it'd be really cool if we could, right? That'd be pretty dope. So that's one thing we could do. We could get to where we could say that, right? Good job. Say thank you, Kingston. Good job. All right, I'm preaching. Okay, here we go. So that's one thing we could do. Now here's another thing. Here's another thing that he has here. You were joyful in your affliction. You were joyful in your persecution, he tells them. Now I talked again 2 weeks ago whenever we talked about Acts about how there's this massive response, and I'm going to talk about it briefly because maybe not everybody heard it, and even if you did, I don't know if you were paying attention or not. I don't know if you're paying attention now, so I'm just going to kind of do a brief reshare, okay? So there's persecution, there's discomfort. Again, I shared 2 weeks ago, and it's the same is true now. I hesitate to call what the American church is going through now, I hesitate to call it persecution. Because whenever I think, and this is just Kingston personally, whenever Kingston thinks of persecution, I think of martyrdom. I think of severe beating in the street. I think of, those things are going on in places currently in the world. And so it's just weird for me to say, oh, we're being persecuted whenever, there's people that are suffering that. Does that make sense? But sure, here's where I think we can come into an agreement, is that there is discomfort being pressed onto the church in America. I think we can agree on that, right? There's the culture is beginning to press into the church and make the church a little uncomfortable, right? It used to be cool to be Christians. We used to be popular. Now we're not popular anymore, right? It used to be, not feel like you're that out of place to say, hey, I'm a Christian. Most people in your workplace probably said they were Christians too, so it wasn't that. Now you might get some weird looks. You may even not get invited to things. You may get made fun of. I'm not saying that that's not bad, and I'm not saying that that doesn't hurt. I'm just saying I hesitate to call that persecution. I call that discomfort. Okay? Now, as that begins, and I've also shared 2 weeks ago, that could be the beginning of persecution. This may be the beginning of what is severe persecution. It may be the beginning of revival. I don't know. We don't know. I don't know. The Spirit knows, and He's in control.
Could you be more specific?
I'm just going to go and turn that on airplane mode. That was funny. Siri thought I was talking to her. Siri thought I was talking to it. Oh man, where was I? That was funny. So this discomfort that's being pressed into our church from the culture, I see the church responding 2 ways to it. And generally speaking, I see the church responding 2 ways to it. We talked 2 weeks ago about how the church is responding by pushing back, by drawing a line in the sand and saying, you will not cross this line. I talked about how I saw pastors saying really kind of evil and very mean things to people who were trying to shut their buildings down, not the churches down, because the gates of hell can't stand against the church, so police certainly can't do anything, but they were trying to shut the building down, and these pastors were saying really mean, really vile things towards the police officers who were doing that, drawing a line and saying, you will not push back against me, I will not suffer, basically, saying, I refuse to suffer, I refuse to suffer at your hand. So that's one stance, and we talked 2 weeks ago about how that's not really a good stance to take. But here's another stance, and this one is it hits me, and it might hit you, but it can be really easy to kind of come up with this. I want to be really careful here. Yahweh has been so gracious to us. Yahweh has been so kind to us. We have all done things that are really, really, really bad. We have all done things that are directly against our God, right? We all deserve punishment. Okay, so you can say, But here's the thing is that so I just wanted to say that so you can't say that I didn't say it. Okay? But one response that we have to suffering is we kind of adopt the woe is me theology. Where I guess I'm just worthy of the suffering. You know, I guess this is just for me. I guess this is just, almost like, it's kind of twisting it, because it's almost like we think that we have to suffer to gain Yahweh's approval. Does that make sense? This comes up if somebody, and I do this, okay? I do this. The guy standing up here telling you not to do this does this, okay? Whenever we try to comfort ourselves if something bad happens and we try to comfort ourselves by saying, well, I deserve worse because I'm a sinner, or if somebody comes to us for some comfort and our response to them is, well, at least you're not in hell. You know, if that's the response that's that's what you do. Here's the thing, guys. If that's how we respond to suffering, both of those options, the option of here's the line, you will not cross it, I will not move, and the woe is me, I'm just a terrible sinner and I deserve hell, so I guess I'll just take the little bit of suffering that I have here, even though it's really both of those options are focused on who? That's right. He's on it. It's focused on us. Do you see the problem there? Both of those options, think about the outside culture looking in. All right, so the church is being pressed, and they see the church widely responding two ways. You won't push me, I'll push back. Or, oh, golly, I guess I guess I deserve it. Right? And the culture is saying, no, I don't want any part of that. And that's not what Paul says here. Paul says, joy. Joy. There was joy in your affliction. There was joy in your persecution. And because of that joy that was there, now the word of the Lord is being advanced like crazy. So can we say that? Can we say that if it's true for the Thessalonians, that the severe persecution that they're undergoing, if they can actually experience J-O-Y, joy, think about that word, joy. That's a real thing. If they could experience joy as they're being killed for their faith, can we experience joy as we're experiencing a little bit of discomfort for ours? Whenever we draw that line and push back, whenever we adopt the woe is me theology, the worm theology, whenever we do that, both of those focused on ourselves, not focused on Christ, no joy in either one of those. So how do we find that joy? There's a story of this dude named Polycarp. Anybody know about Polycarp? Polycarp was bomb, okay? Polycarp was a direct disciple of John the Apostle. Okay, so John taught Polycarp. Polycarp is this guy, he's a bishop, okay, and I know that word might make us a little bit uncomfortable, but he was a bishop, meaning that he was actually overseeing several churches, all right? And Smyrna, I think was, Smyrna, am I saying that right? Smyrna, whatever. So he was overseeing churches there, all right? So like not an elder, but even like a little bit, if you have like a hierarchy type thing, which I know is kind of controversial, but that's what he was overseeing several churches. So there's persecution coming against the church in Smyrna, and actually against all the surrounding areas. Now, Rome is having a little bit of success persecuting in other places. They would say, hey, if you don't renounce Christ, we're going to throw you to the lion. Hey, if you don't renounce Christ, we're going to burn you with a stake. And they would say, I renounce Christ. And they'd say, okay, good job, you can go home now. All right, so they were having some success, and the way they saw it, they were purging this false teaching, this dangerous ideology out of Rome. But then they get to Smyrna, and they're saying, hey, if you don't renounce Christ, we'll kill you. And the response was, and so now they're saying, okay, so what's different here? Like something's different. Who's teaching these people? And they say, well, that'd be Polycarp. So they say, okay, we want Polycarp. Bring us Polycarp, we'll kill him. So they go and they look for Polycarp. The church hears about them looking for Polycarp, and they're like, Polycarp, you got to run. Polycarp's like, I don't want to run. Like, Polycarp, it was 86 years old, so running might have been a little bit difficult, okay? So he's like, I don't want to run, I'm fine, I just want to keep doing my duties here, and if they come, they come, if they don't come, they don't come. Like it doesn't matter. Like, again, this idea of not embracing suffering, I'm sorry, we embrace suffering, not wanting suffering, not searching for it, but also this idea of not running from it, right? It just is what it is. He's content. He's content. If I die, I'm content. If I don't die, I'm content. I just want to keep doing what I have been doing. And they say, no, you need to run. We need to get you out of here. So he eventually listens, and he goes to a nearby farm, and he gets out of the city, and he's at this farm, and he's there, and he's asleep one night, and in his dream, his pillow lights on fire. And so he wakes up, and he says, guys, I'm going to be burned at the stake. And they're like, oh, okay. Nice of you to know that, I guess. Right? So now these guards, the authorities are looking for Polycarp. They track him down at this farm. He doesn't run. He just kind of, at this point, he's talked his people into saying, hey, we're just going to let this be what it's going to be. So they come into the farm. They come to Polycarp. They come to arrest him. Polycarp, this 86-year-old man, says, hey, can you give me an hour to pray? They say, okay, yeah, sure, we can give you an hour to pray. I guess if you try to run, we'll probably catch you because you're 86 years old. So they let him pray for 2 hours. And as he's praying, he prays not only for the people that he's discipled, he's praying not only for his friends, he prays for those who are persecuting him, and even prays for the men that came to arrest him. This is shocking to them. Oh, and somewhere in there, I don't remember if it was before or after that, he actually tells them, hey, get a meal, let's sit down and eat together. Bring these guys some food. They're probably hungry from tracking me down. And they sit down and they eat, and then Polycarp goes with them. And then he stands before 2 different accusers trying to get him to renounce. The last one, they say, hey, renounce or we'll kill you. And he says some really cool line, 86 years. I don't remember exactly what it is. I'll butcher it. Something like 86 years. My God has done me no wrong. Why would I now turn my back on my Lord, King, and Savior? Right? So they're like, okay, so we're going to die. They say that they're going to nail him to the stake so that he doesn't run away from the fire. But he says, no, just tie me. I'll stay. And they tied him. And the account says that he was actually protected from the flames, that whenever he burned, it did not smell bad. It didn't smell like burning flesh. It smelled like burning frankincense. And he wasn't dying. And so they ran him through with a sword. His blood put the fire out, and he was killed. Pretty incredible story, right? My favorite part of it is when they came to arrest him. When they came to arrest him, we see both of these principles here that we're talking about in 1 Thessalonians. One, he's benefiting those that he's among. It's to your benefit that you're in my presence. Here we are. You're in my presence. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to take care of you. But I'm here to kill you. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to make sure you got enough strength to take me back, to kill me. Oh, and here, can I pray for you real quick? Is that cool? And we see joy in affliction. Because he's definitely being afflicted, right? Like he's facing imminent death because of his faith. And he's just joyful, peaceful Polycarp. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So Paul says, hey, Thessalonica, you guys are doing really well. It is to my joy, it's to your benefit that I'm there, and you became imitators of me. Now, if Paul, just think about this, if Paul's benefiting them with his presence, and they become imitators of Paul, then whenever they're in the presence of other people, then those people are being benefited by them. You guys see that? Became imitators of me, you became imitators of Christ, and it is to your joy that you're being afflicted and persecuted, and that you're enduring this, and because of that, the word of the Lord is prospering. Now, that's what Paul said. But let's look a little bit deeper at what Paul said, because there's 2 things in here that I really want to draw out. Verse 6, you became imitators of us and of the Lord. So you didn't just become imitators of Paul and Silas and of the apostles that were there with him. You didn't just become imitators of them, but became imitators of Christ. Now, that right there, can you see those of you who are like me who have struggled with the I don't deserve anything theology, right? The just putting that on ourselves all the time. Could you imagine saying to somebody, be an imitator of me? Because I have a hard time, right? Am I the only one? I have a hard time thinking that. Because I have lived under the worm, woe is me theology for a long time. So it's hard for me to say to somebody, hey, be an imitator of me as I imitate Christ, right? That's what we should be saying. We should be saying, hey, I am following Christ so closely that if you follow me, you will also be following him. Hey, I'm imitating Christ so closely that if you become an imitator of me, you'll also be imitating him. Like, wouldn't that be cool to say? Right? But ultimately, where's the focus? Is the focus on Paul? No, the focus is on Christ. But then there's another one it's kind of hidden. You got to get into the Greek to appreciate this one. Verse 8. For not only has the word of the Lord sounded forth from you in Macedonia and Achaia, and then he goes on to say how it's gone out. But that phrase that I want to focus on is not only has the word of the Lord, the word right there. There's two main Greek words that are translated in the New Testament that come out, our English word. One of them means word. The other one has this kind of weird meaning that you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with. It's the word logos, right? My opinion, my humble opinion, that the word, follow me, okay, if you can. The word for logos, the translation word for logos, it falls short. It would just fall, it was this abstract kind of weird Greek idea that John then used to plug in and say how Christ meets this weird abstract idea that the Greeks had. But like some people say that a better translation might be like this idea of a source, right? In the beginning was the source, and the source was with God, and the source was God. And then so that kind of takes this weird impersonal view of God, but then John brings it and makes it super personal whenever he's like, in this source, this God became flesh and dwelt among us. It doesn't get any more personal than that, right? So he kind of just brings it in. So what word is used here? So here's what I'm saying. Logos is Christ. Christ is logos. Logos is the presence of Christ. Christ's presence is logos. You guys follow that? You guys follow me on that? So right here, what he's saying is not just the word of the Lord. Whenever we think the word of the Lord, we can think like, okay, what's the word of the Lord? Is it the Bible? Well, you could say, yeah, I mean, it's the Bible. Well, here's a tricky. They didn't have like a New Testament then. So it's like Gideon wasn't out saying, hey, pass these around in all the other cities. Like that wasn't going on. So word of the Lord wasn't the Bible because they didn't have that. Is it like just the gospel message? Yes, but it's more. It's logos. This word here in verse 8 is actually logos. The logos went out. So we actually have the presence of Jesus going out because these people are experiencing joy in their persecution. The other day, I went to the batting cages, and it's been a long time since I swung a real bat at a baseball. Played some wiffle ball with some kids, like youth kids. That's totally different. This, you got a pitching machine, it's pitching at you, and it's been a real long time since I swung a bat. And so I'm like, man, what if I miss all of them? Because that could happen. So I'm here, I'm ready, and there's a lot of things I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about my stance, my mic pack. I'm thinking about my stance, feet shoulder width apart, knees slightly bent, back straight, elbow up. You want to get that chin on the shoulder. You want to watch. Okay, so I'm thinking about my stance. I'm thinking about my bat position. I'm thinking about my knuckles, my knuckles lined up. Lots going on in my mind, right? Whenever that ball comes down, if I don't focus on one simple fundamental, it doesn't matter how good my stance is, doesn't matter how good my bat placement is, doesn't matter how good my hand placement is, doesn't matter how pretty I look standing up there, doesn't matter how much it looks like I know what I'm doing. If I don't follow this one really simple fundamental, then I'm going to not hit the ball. And it's a fundamental that somebody with a really poor stance, with a really poor hand placement, with really poor knuckle alignment, with really poor head placement, it's something that someone who has all those wrongly, if they follow this fundamental, they're going to hit the ball. It may not hit it far, but they're going to hit the ball. And that fundamental is this, really simple. If you played baseball, you've heard it before. Watch the ball, hit the bat. Watch the ball, hit the bat. That's watch it. Focus on the ball and watch the ball hit the bat. A lot of times we get wrapped up in so many things as Christians, and we start thinking about so many different things, and we start trying to make sense of so many different things, but like that's all good, that's all fine, and that may help us like hit the ball harder, metaphorically speaking. But if we are missing the fundamental of Christ, we're not watching the ball hit the bat. And Paul here wants to make for sure that it's understood that this isn't about, here's the thing, if you read a letter from Paul and you think that Paul was talking about Paul, then we miss the point. If we think that Paul was talking about the church that he was writing to, then we miss the point. Paul was writing about Christ. Paul was pointing to Christ. Paul was pointing to Jesus. That's what he did all the time. That's what he's doing here all the time. So here's what's really, really cool. We're all need to see ourselves as a church plant. Nice, fresh start that COVID has brought us. But I want to make something really clear. You should not plant this church. I and my wife, Crystal, should not be the ones who plant a church in Ferguson. Let's let Christ plant this church. Let's let Christ plant us in Ferguson. Here's the thing. Whenever Christ is our focus, we become imitators of him, and then we can say that other people, now they can imitate us. Whenever Christ is our focus, but whenever we're our focus, we get all tripped up. Whenever Christ is our focus, we can say, hey, I'm going to have joy in my suffering. I want to talk about that for a second, because that's difficult. The joy in the suffering. One of the best pieces of advice that has ever been given to me, and I've shared this with you guys before, I was in a real dark season. I was in a real depressed season, struggling with all kinds of things, all kinds of darkness. And I went to a mentor, and I wanted the mentor to tell me something that I had heard before that I really actually didn't need. I wanted him to tell me to stop isolating myself. I wanted him to tell me to stop thinking what I've been thinking. I wanted him to tell me to reach out to somebody whenever I get to a dark place. I wanted him to tell me like all this stuff. So I'm telling him what I'm struggling with, and his advice was this: look for Jesus in the darkness. And it was so stupid and so annoying that he said that. And I felt, in the moment, I felt so let down. But I tell you what, the next time I was in the darkness, I began to look for him. And guess what? Didn't find him. But then the next time I was in the darkness, I began to look for him. And guess what? I still didn't find him. But eventually, I was in the darkness, and I found him. In there with me. Here's how it becomes our joy. Here's the thing. This idea of imitating Christ so well so that other people imitate us, this idea of actually being so joyful in our affliction, this is not something that you can muster up within yourself. It's not something that I can muster up within myself. It's not something that we can just say, hey, you know what? Whenever I leave here, Kingston gave me these nice steps to bake a brownie and to go out and to become an imitator of Christ. I can't do that. Like there is no 3-step formula, 4-step formula, 5-step formula on how we can go out and become imitators of Christ. There is no 3, 4, 5-step formula about how we can go out and find joy in our affliction. That's something that the Spirit produces in us as we humbly, imperfectly, and just botch it up as much as we possibly can pursue Christ. Because as we pursue Christ and as we fall over and over again, this is what I found whenever I found him in the darkness. I thought that somehow I was failing in my pursuit of Christ. I was a pastor at a church, and things were just not going well, and I was all kinds of depressed, and there was all kinds of external things. And I thought I'm not doing what I need to be doing. I'm not pursuing Christ very well. And what I found was that in the darkness that he was pursuing me. So it didn't matter how poorly I was pursuing him because he was chasing after me. Whenever our focus is on Christ, even if it's a really bad focus, even if we really mess it up all the time, if our focus is on Christ, eventually, I believe that the Spirit produces in us this ability to imitate Christ so well that other people can imitate us and therefore be imitating Christ. I believe that if we just surrender to Christ imperfectly, I believe that eventually we will find him in every single bit of darkness that's in our lives. And here's what's really cool, what I found to be true, and I hope that you find to be true too, is that in the darkness and in the suffering, here's how I can feel joy in my suffering. Not only because now I'm not just realizing, oh my gosh, Christ came and died and suffered at the hands of men like me. He suffered there and then rose from the dead. He didn't just come to suffer that one moment, but he came and went through that so that he could sit with me in my suffering too. Here's the thing. He chooses to come and sit with us in our suffering. That brings some joy. But then there's another source of joy in the suffering, and that's that suffering is a tremendously excellent teacher. Suffering is such a wonderful teacher. And if I can realize, okay, this sucks, and I'm sad, and I'm angry, and I'm frustrated, and I'm afraid, and I have anxiety, but right here, right now, Christ is with me. I know he's with me, and I can feel his presence with me. Here's the thing is his presence doesn't make the sadness go away. His presence doesn't make the anger go away. It doesn't make the anxiety go away. It's still there, but so is his presence. Now I can sit with him in this darkness, and I can learn something. And whenever I come out of it, if I even come out of it, I'll be better. I'll be more refined. I'll have a clearer picture of what is. I'll have much more appreciation for what is and for my God. So you see, like what this church in Thessalonica is realizing. They're realizing that, and here's what I want you guys to realize as you leave here, that I don't want anybody in this room planting a church, replanting a church in Arnold. I don't want anybody in this room planting a church in Ferguson. I want Christ and his Spirit to plant the church here. I want Christ and his Spirit to plant the church in Ferguson, and that's going to happen whenever we submit ourselves to him, and that Christ and the Holy Spirit plant him in our hearts so well that we say we become imitators of him, that we say we find joy in our suffering and in our affliction. That's not something that you can muster. That's not something that I can muster. That's something that Christ, listen to me, that's something that Christ is actively doing right now. So our part, here's how to grow a church in 3 easy steps, psych. Because here's our part. Our part is to just rest in him. Just lean into him. You're really happy and having a good day, lean into him. You're having a really terrible day, lean into him. And let him create in us a spirit and a habit of imitating him. Father, we come to you, we thank you, we praise you. We thank you that, Christ, that you came and that you modeled for us what it is to benefit those that you're around, and you modeled for us what it is to suffer and to do it with joy. And as you were on the cross suffering, you actually said, forgive them who are killing you. Thank you for Paul, who himself followed you so closely, understanding that his pursuit of you isn't really what was important as your pursuit of him. Understanding that as he was killing Christians, you were still chasing after him. Understanding that your spirit is the one that is doing the work in him so that he is imitating you so well. And understanding that your spirit is the one doing the work in him so that he can actually find joy in his persecution, so that he can then, by others imitating him, he can then actually show others how to find joy in their persecution. And I pray, Spirit, right now that you give us a peace and awareness of your presence that is always with us. It doesn't go anywhere. We go to the heights of heaven, and there you are. We go to the depths of Sheol. There you are. We're in the greatest of situations, the worst of situations, especially right now in the country, the culture that we have, just the discomfort that's being applied to the church, the discomfort that's being applied to Christians. May we just embrace that for what it is. and find joy there because you're there and because you're teaching us something in that? And can we actually get to the point, Spirit, where we can say to those who are applying the discomfort, can we actually get to a point that we can say that we actually want to be a benefit to them? That we actually want to be friends with them? Can we get to the point where we can actually say that we love them? That's not something that we can do. That's something that you have to do, and I'm asking for you to do it in this prayer. We love you. We praise you. We thank you. It's in Yeshua's name that we pray. Amen.